Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and joining me today, as always, is
Brendan Rorison, and well, Adam, we're back on our nonsense. It's been a while since the last episode, but once again we're here to discuss a racing game that many people might not have heard of, or underappreciated, or simply have never played it because it isn't something that's considered a stalwart series in the genre. We're going to be talking some Multi-Racing Championship, which is a game that I didn't even know existed prior to you telling me about it.
Yeah, so the last episode we did was on GTI Club, which in of itself is a game that not many people know about, and that actually is a series. This is definitely not a series. It's a game called MRC on the N64, and I feel like it's... like Shocks is the Time Extend game, you know, that's pretty much always kind of been the way it is, but I feel like MRC is maybe like another Time Extend game for the sole reason that like I grew up playing a ton of it. I know about it, and I feel like it was just unavoidable. When I was a kid, it was like always at every single rental store. It was just everywhere. This N64 racing game that not a lot of people talk about. But the game is pretty much, I don't know if hated is a fair word, but it nobody really likes this game. Nobody ever really, holds this game in the same regard as your Wave Race or Top Gear Rally or any number of N64 racing games, let alone, the Ridge Racers and stuff, Sega Rallies of the PlayStation and the Saturn. So, yeah, it's just kind of this weird oddity, this Genki-developed racing game, which you'd think because it's Genki, people would maybe recognize it more, but that doesn't ever really happen. But yeah, I mean, this is one of those games, my local video store growing up only ever had a small selection. I remember on the N64 there was like this and Extreme G, and there might have been something else I can't remember. I think Off-Road Challenge, the Ivan Stewart racing game by Midway, and maybe Cruisin' USA. That was our N64 selection. So it was a lot of rotation of the same games over and over again. So I remember renting MRC a couple of times, and I don't think I ever really liked it that much. But when you're a kid, you just keep playing the same game. It's like you have choices. There are other games you could probably play, but you're like, no. I mean, I'll tell my mom to rent MRC for like the third time. So that's what we did.
I think, as well, one of the reasons we wanted to have this episode was this idea of the game maybe not resonating with the people who have played it. Like you say, maybe hate's a strong word in some sense, but I think we're hoping that we come into this and you would obviously really like it, and then I could share my thoughts in terms of what I thought, and maybe more on the negative side of things. But this is another kind of key example of me not having much experience on the Nintendo 64, so I absolutely know nothing about it, so I've got no skin in the game, in the sense that there's no benefit to me trying to forge up positives for this game. But what I will say is I just really enjoyed it, genuinely speaking. Obviously we'll get into the discussion a bit more in depth soon and talk a bit about the nuances of the game, but I was genuinely shocked at the kind of level of playability of it and the sheer variation, given that in terms of scope it is fairly limited. But like most racing games from that era, it was one of those situations where games kind of they live or die by the gameplay, and here it's an interesting and unique handling model that you can mostly get a hang of, but obviously there's a few kind of kinks in there that make it a bit of a challenge, especially as we'll soon get into, I suppose. The kind of separation of vehicle types from road to off-road cars can make it feel like a totally different game at times.
Yeah, really the most interesting thing for me was going to be how you received it, because as we've discussed in the past when we talk about N64 racing games, you didn't really grow up with an N64, so you're coming to this stuff kind of for the first time. And sort of what touched this off is, Jason Lamp, who we've had on before, big Sega racing guy. he and I were in a store, in a retro game shop in Jersey, and we came across, we were in the N64 section. This was probably like 2 or 3 months ago, and we came across just like 16 copies of MRC. Like, they didn't have as many copies of any one single game for any other game. It was just MRC, and we kept making this joke about like, well, should I buy all of them and then just give them away? Because no one's going to care about this game. No one does care about this game. I'm probably the only one in the store right now who's played it, and Jason, obviously. And like, I don't know. I mean, anyone in the Time Extend Discord you bring it up to, for the most part, it's just like, it sucks. So I just thought it would be just a good, meme, a joke to just like give them away. Because again, it's very indicative of the type of stuff we like, because it's unknown and like moderately interesting. But the thing is, each copy of the game was like $6 or $7, which, like, if you go back 10 years ago, they would have been like $1 or $2. So it's like, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I would have had to spend like, upwards of $100 to buy all of these copies of MRC, and that didn't really seem like a great investment. So
just for a joke as well.
just to save, just to save, and then I would have had to ship them out. And with the listeners all over the place, it would have been a little bit difficult. But yeah, so in this whole process, I mean, you played the game for the first time. I went back to the game, and I've, like I said, I played it when I was a kid. Didn't play it for a long time. I have a copy on the N64, but I didn't have that with me, so I ended up emulating it, as you did. And I actually appreciate the game now more than I ever did before. And it's funny because, like, the list of like weird racing game hot takes I have, I'd say like one of the higher up ones, one of the ones that people find more offensive, is that I don't like Ridge Racer and Ridge Racer Revolution on the PlayStation, and I don't think that they handle very well, and I don't think that they're really fun to play at all. But my hot take is that MRC is better than both of those games, which no one ever wants to hear. But I just genuinely think what it is, and you allude to this game has a very interesting conceit, which is that it feels a lot like, and it looks a lot like, Ridge Racer for the N64. But the big difference is that you have a wide variety of cars, and you have 3 different tracks. And while it's only 3 tracks, they all have these branching paths, and there are road sections and there are off-road sections. And in Sega Rally-like fashion, they do definitely affect the handling of the car. Now, the handling in this game is nowhere near as good as Sega Rally's, but you really have to, depending on the car you choose, you really have to be careful about the paths that you take, because there are some like rally cars and sports cars that are really going to be better on-road, and then there are like trucks and buggies that are going to be better off-road. And in a lot of cases, the off-road paths are shorter. They actually cut, in terms of distance, they cut time. However, they're slower. When you drive off-road in this game, you can't hit the same top speeds. Maybe they're a little bit harder to navigate. They're not as fast. So you almost have to be, I mean, if you're in like a truck, you really don't want to spend as much time on the asphalt as possible, but depending on the track, you might actually kind of want to mix and match some of those paths for the optimal route. And that's when the game, I think, gets really, really interesting, and offers something that a lot of other racing games don't. I mean, honestly, I can't think of another racing game outside of, and this is going to sound weird, but Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 that had like a mixture of like all of these different paths you could take with like on-road and off-road portions, and you'd really have to think about like which ones you take, because they're going to affect the car differently. And MRC's car roster is so vast that like that really factors into it too. And it's just like, to me, it's like a Ridge Racer type game, like with an extra kind of tweak to it, you know?
Yeah, exactly, and I totally agree. To be honest, I think that what really surprised me was the sheer variation in gameplay for a game that is almost like some sort of Ridge Racer clone. Because, like you say, like when you think about those first Ridge Racer Revolution, I think we kind of look at it through the rose tinted glasses of what Ridge Racer is as a series as a whole. Obviously, when we discussed the Ridge Racer series on the pod, I think we've heard a few people say they were surprised at how many kind of negative points were brought up and maybe contentious points, but that's because even in those early days, I think Ridge Racer, unless you've played that first game in an arcade, it's really hard to really kind of say completely 100% legitimately that the first game has a fantastic handling model. It works, and at the time it was brilliant, but with MRC, it doesn't, in my opinion, once again, have a perfect handling model, far from it, but what it has is a handling model that's incredibly more varied and reacts more to the cars that are there in terms of how each car handles, because you could have seen that from Genki, who developed the game in conjunction with Imagineer, you could have seen they basically split it into on-road and off-road cars, as we talked about, and then left it there in terms of handling. But every single car in this game just handles so differently that you could absolutely scream to first place in one of the hardest tracks in the right car that works for you. But then you try another truck, say, if it was a truck you were good with, and that truck you can barely fucking finish the race. And it's really interesting to see that, because like there's no need for this game to have that much kind of variation, but it just makes it feel a lot more of a complete package. And especially in some of those boss races, it's really important that you choose a car you're comfortable with, because the way the handling model works, it almost feels as if you're always on that kind of edge of control, and if somebody kind of lightly taps the car, or you kind of slightly scrape a wall, you can start to feel the car kind of sliding into this like incredibly difficult slide to correct. It's an interesting handling model purely because it is so dynamic, which is not something I personally expected.
Yeah, and it has a lot of content in terms of the cars. Like, I don't have the actual number in front of me, but it's got to be like somewhere around like 8 cars or something like that, which would have been a pretty large selection for 1997 when this game came out. And they're not like licensed cars, but they in the Ridge Racer fashion, they do kind of borrow elements from a lot of cars of the day. So the main car is the one you see on the cover, is this kind of weird buggy thing. I don't really think you can compare to anything, but then there's this other car that shows up a lot, the Imagineer branded car that's white and red, and that's either like a Lancer Evolution, or it's a cross between basically every Japanese like sport coupe or sedan of the day. It looks kind of like a Lancer Evo, it looks kind of like an Impreza, it looks kind of like a Skyline. There's this car that is very clearly a Renault 5 Turbo. There's this other car that's very clearly an Alfa Romeo, like GTV. And in Ridge Racer fashion, like these cars do look pretty appropriate to, you know, modern cars of the day, and the design I think is pretty cool. And if you're driving the trucks, you know, like there's one truck in the game that just looks like your standard like Toyota Hilux, and it's Ocean branded, like the publisher. The trucks, I feel like, are actually, the way that the cars are structured, the trucks are more of the beginner vehicles, because they'll never hit the same top speeds as the sports cars, but you can drive them on any surface. So like I end up enjoying the game mostly through the trucks, because you take like the Alpha onto an off-road section and the car doesn't turn. And so I feel like there are some cars in this game that you just really don't want to use, and like maybe if you're really, really good at MRC for whatever reason, you're like a speed runner or something, like maybe you use those cars. But for me, I just kind of tend to go with the trucks. And the game does get pretty difficult. There are like devil and angel cars at the end, which also is like another Ridge Racer trope that this game kind of copies. The devil car is called the Hanya, which I don't know that's supposed to mean something else, or if it's just supposed to kind of sound like Honda. And then the angel car is called the Deus, which sounds, like a god type thing. So, and then that is like a Caterham, basically. So it's very, yeah. I mean, the Ridge Racer illusions definitely carry themselves throughout this game. But the thing is, like, a lot of people really don't like it, and you go back and you look at reviews and stuff, and it's a generally. It was kind of seen as an also-ran. On the N64, it was dismissed as like Top Gear Rally was basically decided early on as like the N64 racing game that everyone was going to go crazy about. And sure. MRC is just like I found the IGN review because there's not a lot of content about this game out there. And pretty much everything's just like, wait for Top Gear Rally or San Francisco Rush. Well, I guess this game came out before them. It suffers from that typical 90s issue of there's no car damage, therefore it's not good.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, and to be honest, like, I think it's actually graphically like a pretty good looking game, because it has some of that fog issue, but it's not nearly as bad as like Top Gear Rally on the N64. And it's kind of got that like grainy aspect to it. Like some of the tracks, like Downtown and the mountain track, really remind me a lot of Rage Racer. They kind of have that gritty aspect to them. So, yeah, and that's why, like, the more I play this game, the more I just feel like it doesn't really feel like an N64 racing game. It feels like something from the PlayStation. It's just weird oddity.
I think it is, and I am surprised at just this reputation it has even at the time in terms of not being that great, because it's not as if the Nintendo 64 was going to have a plethora of racing games once its library completed, so you would imagine that people would have been trying to go in with as much of an open mind as possible. But I think especially in that era, there was this kind of predetermined look at racing games about how maybe expansive or how much they were pushing the envelope they had in terms of scope. And obviously MRC has these like incredibly detailed tracks, but there's still only like 3 of them, with the mirror variants as well. And in terms of the kind of core gameplay loop, they're not exactly trying to reinvent the wheel, but that's fine. I think that the kind of boss battles like you were talking about as well, it provides a nice additional layer on top of the racing, because the kind of main crux of the game isn't that difficult if you can get the right car, or you can modify the car as well. So if you choose a car you really like and get it working well, then it shouldn't pose too much of an issue. But what's interesting with the boss cars is that I personally found them pretty challenging. But Adam, I'm not sure if you've just built up like incredible skill at this game throughout the years and don't find it that challenging, but you were saying you kind of coasted through it almost.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember playing this game, not even when I was a kid, but maybe like, 10 years ago or something, when I got again on the N64 and I sourced a secondhand copy, and I remember it being pretty difficult at the end. I remember the first loop you go through, because basically it's, kind of classic arcade racing game fare where you do all the tracks once and you do them again and you do them in like mirror mode or whatever, and then you do them like, against the boss cars. And I remember the first loop, maybe a second loop was easy, but once you get into those mirrored tracks and you start facing the boss cars, it gets pretty difficult. But yeah, I played through the game and I feel like I coasted through the boss cars. I think what I maybe did that I hadn't done the first time was I picked a different car than I normally do, and I didn't go with the easiest truck to drive. I went with something a little bit faster, and I kind of tweaked the handling characteristics and stuff, which like makes a big difference in this game. I think this is actually one of the things about MRC that makes it very interesting that maybe people who've kind of just dipped into the game and played for a minute and not really explored aren't aware of. But yeah, you can tweak all of these cars. And, it's an old racing game, but there's like 7 or 8 sliders from like, gearing to aerodynamics to suspension to steering speed and all of these things that and brake pressure that make the cars handle differently and deal with the terrain differently. You can pick, I think, different tires too. I know like Sega Rally on the Saturn had a little bit of that, but even Sega Rally on the Saturn didn't have the same, I think, depth and level of customization in terms of like car handling and car behavior that this game had. And it does allow you to use some cars that you wouldn't otherwise use. Allows you to take like a road-based car and make it a little bit better for the off-road sections. And I think that adds another layer of complexity to a game that makes it really fun. I always... I see this game and it reminds me of you ever see that Namco the arcade game Dirt Dash?
Yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of that because it's all the Ridge Racer similarities we're talking about, but it has all of those off-road portions. It's more of a rally game. And yeah, I mean this game to me it kind of looks like that. Probably doesn't play like that at all because I've barely played Dirt Dash. But yeah, it's funny because I feel like the N64, we've talked about this before, it was one of those systems that it wasn't really known for racing games, so anytime a racing game would appear on it, developers were always trying to do something a little bit different. And I think games like this and Beale Adventure Racing that we've talked about in the past, and probably a couple others too, are really emblematic of that. Just taking your sort of standard racing game of the day, just adding these little elements to it to make it a little bit more unique. And I think if you're looking at it on paper, there's not a whole lot that differentiates MRC, but just for whatever reason when you're playing it, I mean, these tracks aren't particularly long, but I think the breadth of paths that they offer makes them feel really big, makes them feel like kind of vast, at least for the day, because there's so many different routes that you can combine. Although I do tend to get the Seaside is kind of its own thing, but the latter two tracks, the mountain and downtown, almost feel like the same track. So I tend to get those confused.
Yeah, definitely. There's when you've got like free tracks, you always think they'll go for the route that Sega Rally did in terms of making them incredibly distinct and have their own kind of nuances in terms of the environment. But those latter two definitely fall into that category, especially when, for example, the game decides to change up the weather a bit, because obviously that's a feature in there as well. If it's like incredibly foggy, it's almost impossible to tell those two tracks apart, it feels like.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think just to kind of generally comment on the complexities of the game with such a simple scope, I mean, let's be honest here, a lot of these complexities being layered on top of each other, it makes the game feel pretty repetitive because there is a limited amount of tracks and championship options, and the boss races are the 1v1 type races, of course, and you've got time trial in there. So like, we're not trying to say that it's this incredibly varied and unique experience. It's pretty much the exact blueprint for what a 90s racer would be at that time period, without any kind of specific elements which would make it stand out. But I think MRC deserves credit for the fact that it takes that idea of these tracks almost feeling like a bit, like we talk about with a few games throughout Time Extend, it's like a living world in the sense that you have those different pathways you can take, you have all these different shortcuts. It's not a guarantee that these shortcuts will make you win either, because some shortcuts will be better than others depending on the car, depending on how good the driver is as well. So it's not like it's a surefire, just take this route every time and you will win. Obviously in the 1v1s with the boss races, it can be a bit more methodical, because ultimately you're just trying to kind of get your bumper in front of theirs and pip over the line. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like it's one of these games where I can go on and I can spend a good, say, 30 minutes trying to beat a certain race, and then I can turn it off again and leave it there, and that is the most enjoyable model. It's not something you're going to sit and play for 2-3 hours on end anymore, just given all the options we have in terms of racing games, even on the N64 itself, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, if you want to get particularly picky, the other kind of Nintendo 64 racers maybe do what MRC does a bit better, but it's still worth playing in the sense that you're experiencing something that didn't make much of a mark when it released. It's kind of been forgotten to time a little bit. And it's also a game developed by a development studio who have some of the kind of most prominent cult classics in the entire genre. So it's worth playing from that perspective. And from a personal perspective as well, I really enjoy the odd vibe of the game, because the menus, yeah, it's so fucking weird. I'm glad we're getting to talk about this, because like the menu system almost seems like it's kind of trying to approximate like Sega Rally on the Saturn, with the kind of dulled colours, and the fonts especially at times seem very Sega Rally-like depending on what's up on the screen. Like, I think it's like the time up display or something that comes up that looks incredibly similar to the Game Over font in Sega Rally. The cars themselves have that weird 90s like oddity as far as like the names just seem like absolute fucking nonsense. The wide variety of like car bodies are those ones that you find commonly in that era. But as far as the oddities go, like for me, the kind of post boss race like tiny cutscenes that play are the most like oddly dream sequence fucking nonsense like I've seen in a racing game in a while, and it's so fucking trippy, man, like the shit that comes up. And just while we're on that as well, we're talking about what kind of Hanya means. Apparently it's basically a way of describing a jealous female Japanese demon. Apparently it's like a mask, so that's what the boss car has, that icon, the mask.
Interesting.
Apparently it's kind of it's something from the old Japanese theatre, basically, to represent a jealous female demon.
So it's called the in the garage, which I love the car selection in this game. It shows you like these cars and they're all in their own garages, and above it has kind of the logo and what the car is, and it says Hanya VH110R. And I don't even know how to describe what this car looks like. It looks like nondescript 90s supercar, but I can't even really compare it to anything because it just looks that generic. But also looks kind of cool. Definitely the devil car of the game.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's pretty funny actually. Like it almost reads like a license plate when you're reading it out there. But like I was fucking reading that like subconsciously as Victor for some reason. So I'd be like, oh.
Well, that's the thing, that the names are so weird, because I actually had to pull up a FAQ to remind me what the names are. So there's a Tigris, which is like it's like a Renault Megane, but it's called like it's almost spelled Sean, like SHAUN, as like the manufacturer, but the A and the U were transposed, so it's like Shuan Tigris. And there's there are these other cars. There's the Armstrong and the Meteora, and then like when like the Imagineer car is called the Galleon, but then the Ocean truck is just called Ocean. It's just the publisher's name, and I don't think there's no Genki car, but it's just phenomenally odd. I think it's hard to tell, because like Imagineer may have had more to do with this game than Genki. I'm not really sure. Maybe Genki just kind of handled the handling side of it, but there's so little known about it. Like I was trying to dig up whatever information I could. One of my favorite things is, so IGN is usually a good resource when you go back and try and find any information about these old racing games, because IGN has obviously been around forever, and even all their previews and stuff are still live, but they don't have any for this game. But they have one news article dated from September 4th, 1997, that's titled MRC on sale now everywhere, and the whole article is probably like 70 words, and it just says like, retailing for $70, MRC went on sale across the US today. The game appeared seemingly out of nowhere with little hype and very little pre-warning. We contacted Ocean and were told that the game, after being delayed once before, was planned for an early September release and had actually shipped over a week ago. Because this is this is the late 90s. That's like, when did the game come out? Apparently, it's been out for over a week, and people broke street dates all the time back in the day. So it's definitely indicative of the '90s video game landscape in that sense. But yeah, just totally a different time. $70 for this too, which I don't know what that is in today money. I'll try and find that out right now.
I think Nintendo 64 games were always pretty expensive, weren't they? Like, I'm guessing the cost of the cartridges probably bumped up the cost of a lot of games, or I think that's something I've heard.
Yeah, they were very expensive. So $70 in 1997 is $120 today, which is crazy. So imagine spending $120 on a racing game with 8 cars and 3 tracks, and it's not even like anyone's favorite racing game. It's just fine. Like,
yeah, I mean, I guess that's a really good point, because we look at it from the lens of having this game readily available at no extra cost to us whatsoever. We're reviewing it through the eyes of a kind of a 2021 look, and can you imagine, like, $120 isn't a lot of cash, so I can sort of understand why maybe the reception was a bit more lukewarm. But thankfully, those kind of caveats that it was looked at back then aren't really relevant today, because we do have the game readily available, and I think more than ever, people are always keen to find games they may have missed out on before. And yeah, Multi-Racing Championship, as far as it goes, I would agree with you, Adam, in the sense that I think the enjoyability factor of Multi-Racing Championship is higher than the original Ridge Racers on PlayStation, because first of all, it's actually fun to play instead of feeling that you're trying to wrestle with the game quite a lot. And secondly, it's a nice kind of evolution of that concept of Ridge Racer in a good way, like you're saying earlier. Namco did kind of explore it almost with Dirt Dash, and God, imagine a reality where those two, Ridge Racer and Dirt Dash, were kind of brought together and made into something like Multi-Race Championship. Yeah. Can you imagine?
Yeah, and I mean, Dirt Dash obviously never even got a home port, and it's a really interesting game that I've tried to kind of emulate on like MAME and stuff like that, and varying degrees of success there. It's one of those like obscure '90s racing games that I don't think anyone's really tried to make sure plays well, on PCs via emulation or whatever. But yeah, the one thing you touched on before when we were talking about how weird this game is the like kind of the race victory screens, and that's definitely, if you play MRC, you'll definitely win a race or two early on, and you'll kind of get to see what we mean. But just to explain, like, they're so weird. Like, basically this, like, I remember one of them, the car, it's always a car driving up to a trophy, or the car driving up to like a podium, and sitting on the podium is a trophy, and you just have this weird insinuated interaction between this car and this trophy, and there are no people. There's no human. There's no driver. It's just a car driving up to this thing that it won. And it just like, it reminds me a lot of weird reference, but I remember when we were talking about Need for Speed, you were talking about how like the world existed just for cars and no humans were a thing. And it kind of brings me back to that. And the other weird thing is that they always happen in these weird places. So like for one of the tracks, it's like on top of a mountain. Like this highest point on the mountain, there's like a curving road that goes up it, and like this like cathedral exists on top of the mountain just to celebrate the car that's going to be like, vaunted and sacrificed to the gods or something. It makes no sense. There's another one where a car drives into like a coliseum, where presumably there are people around watching the ceremony unfold. It's very yeah, ceremony is probably the best way to describe it. It feels almost like pseudo-religious. It's just so strange, and definitely is sort of emblematic of the limitations of the hardware of the time, because it's not like we can have people here You don't even get like virtual racing character models. It's just a car driving up to a trophy, and that's it.
Yeah, those cutscenes are worth seeking out because they just have this very kind of eerie atmosphere to them, and I imagine as well, playing it back in the day on the CRT screen and stuff, it would have just looked like incredibly strange. I just love things like that in old games where it's like, I wonder what the thought process was about how they thought it was going to look and how that is the closest approximation of somebody's vision because it's just so strange. And like the volcano one, even in terms of where these ceremonies are held, the volcano one is on the seaside track, so it's like, that's an odd choice for a seaside track when you could have literally just had it at the beach,
right,
or something. But no, like you say, it's all very hyper religious and cult like. So get this car to drive up this like spiraling road that you see when it zooms out, and just go up there and look at the trophy. I mean, is the car allowed to take the trophy home, or has it got to stay there for reasons that we just don't know this stuff? It's not like there's a trophy room element in the game, so there's no evidence to suggest that trophy is actually taken back.
I just love there's a podium, but no one's standing on the podium, so, and the car won't fit on the podium because the podium's too small. So yeah, just weird. And the one other thing I want to talk to, I know we're jumping around a lot. We don't have to get into a deep discussion. We've talked about how weird the handling is, and the one thing I'll say is if you're gonna play this game, you can drift in it, but I haven't found drifting to be a particularly fast or intuitive technique. So the way that I play MRC, and I have found lots of success with, is you kind of have to do the F0, tap the throttle a lot as you're turning to maintain grip.
Yes.
Because if you keep the throttle pinned down, you will just kind of do this skid where the back end of the car will step out, but you'll just plow. You won't actually turn. But if you tap a lot, you just have endless amounts of grip. And that, I don't know if that was really intentional, because it seems like a pretty easy way to exploit the handling model. But I find that if you just feather the throttle all the time, then you will never break traction. It's a very... at first, the game almost feels unplayable until you discover this, and it's like, oh, okay, well, now if I do this, I can pretty much just win every race.
It feels like it's necessary, though, for some of the later races to learn that kind of tap-to-turn model, and to be honest, that's when the game really clicked for me, once I started doing that, because once the car starts drifting, as we were talking about earlier, it can be really hard to snap it back into gear, especially for some of those road cars.
Yeah.
Just feels like you're sliding forever at times.
For sure. One thing that isn't directly related to MRC, but I think we're maybe going to have to talk about at some point, or at least will become a topic of discussion in the Time Extend Discord, is trying to look up information about this game. I was taken to an Internet Archive scan of a Next Generation issue from 1997. And this would have been the summer of 97, before MRC came out, and it has a news section, Tokyo Game Show report from Japan, which I love going back in these old magazines, because it seemed like every single issue it was like, and meanwhile in Japan, and then you see like all the games that you're not getting to play, or you'll get to play in a year and a half, or won't come out here. In there, it mentions MRC as one of the many games. Despite the showing from larger publishers, smaller companies really made the show worth seeing. Companies such as Imagineer and its thoroughly enjoyable multi-racing championship, and off further on the N64, or Wep Systems with its multiplayer sequel to Cool Borders, and they're just talking about these like little developers and their games. Within here is a section on the Saturn, and this is really interesting, Brendan. So, in this paragraph, it says, Sega made a strong impression with a gorgeous demo of a Panzer Dragoon RPG called Axel, a promising version of Last Bronx. Rounding out the Sega showing was the F1 simulation Tactics Formula 1, is the name of this game. Have you ever heard of this before?
Never. This is the first time
Yep.
I've heard of it.
So I saw this. I see F1 simulation, and the title of the game is Tactics Formula One. And I'm like, is this F1 Challenge? Because as far as I know, it's the only F1 game on the system. But no,
Yeah.
there is a Saturn, a Japan only release called. It's actually called Tactics Formula. I don't think it has the F1 or the FIA license or anything like that.
Right.
It is a turn-based Formula One simulator.
What? No way.
It is top down, and it basically turns the track into a board game essentially.
Mate, that is fucking. I'm just looking it
Yeah.
up now. Holy
Yeah,
shit.
it's weird. You can find footage of it on YouTube. There's this very, very blurry video. Doesn't have any license anything, but yeah.
Wow, that is crazy, man. A turn-based racing game. Holy crap.
Yeah, it's very strange. Basically, it changes the entire track, and this is all like top down 2D sprites, everything,
Yeah.
bitmap backgrounds and shit. You have this kind of diamond pattern going down the track of like where you can move. So, you can be in the middle of the road. You can kind of be on one end of it, and I don't, because I've never seen this game before. I don't know if you're kind of using this as like strategy to pass cars. But what's interesting is that like I'm seeing that after some moves, the game actually goes into like 3D mode, and you have like a little cutscene of cars taking off in 3D. So it's not just all top down, which is good, because otherwise it'd be pretty lame for the Saturn. But yeah, it's such a weird game. It's one of those games I don't even know if we could ever really play it, because it's a strategy game essentially, and it's all in Japanese.
Yeah, exactly. We might be able to kind of play about with it at best, but yeah, I think that'd be a tough one to play. But there are people in the comments of this YouTube video saying that it is actually fairly playable for English speakers. So, it's interesting. I'm just looking up the developer to see if they've done anything
The description
else that is notable.
description says, I've picked this up and tried to get into it so many times over the last 13 years, but it's always fallen flat.
Ah, right, okay. Maybe not worth it. Just looking up the developer itself. Holy shit, no way. So, they mostly seem to do like kind of early wrestling games outside of Formula
Wow.
Tactics. But then they've also made the Def Jam games. So Fight for New York.
No
and
way,
Vendetta.
really?
Swear down,
Wow.
mate, yeah. And then SimCity on the DS.
Oh my god.
Specifically. The Ready to Rumble game that came out on the Wii. Jeez, this is crazy.
Oh yeah,
Just
AKI.
having a look
Yeah, I
at it.
remember seeing them related to like wrestling games and stuff. Wow.
And then in kind of later times, they shifted towards the new style boutique games on the 3DS. Don't know if you've ever seen those. It's like a weird game where you own like a fashion shop and stuff. They made those, and then they did a lot of idle games in Japan.
If you see the cover of
But
it,
Formula Tactics is the outlier.
if you see a cover of it, it's a great cover, great box art, because they don't even like it says Tactics Formula. The like font and everything of the logo is very like wacky kids game. And then underneath it, upside down, it says tactical board game. And there are like models of F1 cars, but they're made to look like board game pieces. So they're all just like plastic and like all one color. And they don't even try to make this like, oh, it's like a real like simulation, like a race manager thing. They go full on like, this is a board game. This is a video game version of a tabletop board game that just happens to have cars in it. So, yeah,
That is such a strange oddity that could only be revealed in a podcast focusing on MRC.
Certainly the kind of thing that would never would have never been successful in the US. I imagine, if they tried to localize it for Europe, though, might have gotten. I mean, maybe they needed like the F1 license, but I feel like if they got that, people would have been interested.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strange oddity, to say the least, especially for like a home console. Like, you might think something like this only top-down mode would have existed on a handheld of some sort as well, just because of the turn-based nature. So, that is a Saturn game that I had no idea existed.
If you have played Virtua Formula, if you have played Formula Tactics, tell us about it on Twitter or in the Discord or wherever you can, because when I discover a game like this existed, in this day and age, in 2021, it's always a bit of a surprise. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to actually find if any are on sale on eBay, but it doesn't look like it. There's a guide. Oh wait, no, sorry, there is actually, and it's not that expensive. It's £16 pre-owned with £7 delivery, so it's not as if it's like absolutely price gouged. It seems fairly standard.
There is a project to translate Racing Lagoon, so maybe after Racing Lagoon is done, somebody can do Formula Tactics. That will never ever happen.
You never know. Maybe we'll get a sequel one day. Now that it's been unearthed.
Imagine if we had that power, man.
That was a tangent. Oh, I know, man.
I wish.
I know. I think it's like just somebody walks into a boardroom like, remember Tactics Formula? No? Well, we're making a sequel, so get ready.
Well, that's the other thing, is I keep calling it Formula Tactics, and I keep getting even the title of the game wrong. The first time that I read it in that Next Gen article, I thought that like, some idiot from some journalist, American journalist in the 90s, probably like mixed up a Final Fantasy Tactics game and the Formula 1 game and like conflated them into this weird thing that they didn't understand because they don't know Japanese, but that was actually the name of the game. So that was a bit surprising. I was ready to just be like, oh, this person's an idiot, but no, that the game did exist and it was called that. So
just because you brought up the fact it's from a magazine article, I was looking at one for Multi-Racing Championship as well, and found a very 90s comment that just like sums up that era pretty well. So this was basically an article that was looking at the different cars at the game and had like a small description of what they might have looked like and random facts. So for the second boss car, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but is it like Deus,
I think.
Deus, okay. So listen to this, right? And I'm not sure if this is actually true or not, because we just talked about the fact there doesn't seem to be any driver models in the game. But for Deus, it says, doesn't look like much, but its driver is a psycho chick in leathers, which always gets our vote. Faster Pussycat, kill.
What the fuck? Yeah, I don't remember a driver model. Maybe they show up. Maybe one actually does show up. But yeah, making it real sexy like that is very 90s. It's a very, very 90s thing to do.
Yeah, it's funny, man. Like anytime you look at these type of articles, there's always little lines like that make you go like, okay, whatever. But there is actually a really cool thing in this article that actually has a bullet point about the game, which is exactly what you said at the start of this pod, that it just literally says it could easily be a PlayStation game, which is pretty interesting for somebody from that time era to remark something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a look and a feel to N64 games. It's one that I hate, which is why I don't really like my N64 games. But MRC doesn't really have that. It's like it's grainier. The textures are like just sharper and everything, and I think it's a pretty good looking game. But I could see if you're the kind of person, if we're taking this back to the 90s and like you want like that aesthetic is sort of celebrated now, but maybe wasn't at the time. And at the time it was more like you wanted games that were honestly like blurrier and like just had weird like Top Gear Rally just with its weird damage, which like if you look at the damage in Top Gear Rally, it makes no physical sense whatsoever. It's like you'll end up There's like, do you remember when like Gran Turismo 5 came out and like some of the cars had like really sophisticated damage, but it was really just like the polygon mesh could be contorted in all sorts of weird and unnatural ways, like, and then over time, like Polyphony slowly like updated that out of the game because it was resulting in cars looking like they were melting and shit. That's basically what Top Gear Rally's damage was. And like, you know, it was the late 90s, so I don't begrudge them too much for it, but like I will never understand why people like Top Gear Rally so much. It is not a good game. It's really just the damage. As far as I can tell, the only reason anyone ever liked it was because it had damage. But it handles terribly. It doesn't sound great. It doesn't play great. The cars look awful. It's weird. I don't know. But I think it's something that we should maybe talk about at some point because it was seen as like the N64's answer to Sega Rally for better or worse. So.
Yeah, sounds like we might as well look at it next. Move to these Nintendo 64 games. Well, not next, but at some point soon. Obviously, got to see what we're talking about. But I was just looking at this article again on MRC just to see if there were any interesting tidbits, and I think, like, generally accepted, the King Roader is, as the name would suggest, the kind of the best car in the game, kind of objectively speaking, if you can basically kind of tune it right. And on the side of the car, it literally says, "This car is the best car, the best car." It just says on the side of the fucking car, and I've never noticed that before when I was playing.
I feel like we've talked about this before, but I think it was really, it's gonna be mean, but it was much easier to have a job as like a game journalist or something like that in the 90s. Like you just write weird shit or the things that don't make sense or things that are, and you just, it goes to print and no one cares, and no one's gonna question it. I'm sorry, but you can call up Genki weeks after the game came out and ask, "Is the game out?" and they'll tell you yes or no, and then your job's been done for the day. Oh my god.
Yep.
Well,
man, another impressive fucking hour talking about a random Nintendo 64
that's what
game.
we do best.
It truly is. I'm sure everybody's been waited with bated breath for this one. So, I can't wait to see the thousands and thousands of listens.
The MRC pod has finally been done. I like talking about these games that no one else cares about. It doesn't, it's not ever going to extend the brand of Time Extend, but I feel like no one else is an MRC pod, so we're definitely doing something within our own lane. But that said, if you're listening to this and you're like, I would really like it if you guys talked about a particular game, and you want to bring that to our attention, we're always willing to hear about it, especially if it's one that we haven't checked out before, because I feel like, we're talking about MRC, and it's going to inspire some people to pick up and try the game, and I wonder how many of them are actually going to enjoy it and how many aren't. But if you have any suggestions, hit us up on Twitter. As always, if you would like to join the Discord, just send us a DM or something like that, and we'll get you in. And just, it was a while since the last episode, but and we always say we're trying to do them more often, but we are, so hopefully it won't be too long until the next one.
Yeah, exactly. I think we can get a bit of momentum now and try and commit to that dreaded recording schedule that always seems to fall through. It's one of these ones, I think we talked about it before, but because we both have the time zone difference especially, but then also just real life shit getting in the way at times, it can be frustrating. But I think that's kind of one of the biggest breaks we've actually had in quite a while, so we should be able to kind of move from there, and there's just so much to talk about. This is one we could tick off the list.
I'm excited for your in-depth analysis on why Art of Rally on the Switch is so...
Oh my... Jesus, right. I don't want to go off into too big of a tangent with this, but it would extend
the podcast by another hour. Oh my god.
Yeah, oh man. Simply put, right, I think this is very harsh, but this is an expensive game at the end of the day, and I love what Fun Selector did with that title. Like, I'm a huge advocate of it, as you know, Adam. But please, not yet anyway, I wouldn't rush out and pay for this. It's just way too expensive for how it looks and plays. It's incredibly rough. Like you're saying, we could go on for an hour so far about what I've experienced, but it's like, I think it was Andrew from GT Planet that commented something that really made me laugh on the Twitter post I made that said, like Colin McRae Rally for the Atari ST. And yeah, it's like you take this like incredibly appealing visual art style which thrives on minimalism.
You think would be great on the Switch,
Yeah, you would think so, 100%. And like you just reduce it to the absolute foundations of what it probably looked like when it was in alpha development. So it just doesn't have any charm or anything. It just feels like a totally empty sandbox, and it's really funny because, like, you know yourself, Adam, from what you've played, like, before the race starts, it will show you like these scenic pans of the track and show you all the kind of areas and stuff. But because in the Switch version they've removed so much of the scenery and environment elements, there's genuinely times where it pans onto like a pale yellow, like, flat piece of land with like nothing there. And it's like it's so fucking strange, man. I know that this game isn't either the most well optimized or has a lot of fucking physics calcs going on in the background maybe that makes it not run incredibly well even on PC without a small bit of tweaking, so I don't want to kind of put Fun Selector on blast. I know that the Switch can be hard to work with, but at the same time this port of the game almost removes everything that makes it admirable in the first place. So
the one thing I'll say is you put up those 4 screenshots last night, and honestly, like, I was looking at it on my phone and you were like, it looks terrible, and I put up the first shot of like the buildings and stuff within one of the stages. I tapped on that, and it's on the phone screen on my iPhone 11 Pro or whatever. So, it's not that big, and it zoomed out, and I'm like, clearly there's less detail here, but it doesn't look bad. But then something compelled me to just, like, pinch to expand, and when I did that, I could see, like, I have never seen such a lack of anti-aliasing before in my life, and such a low resolution, and, like, once I did that, I was like, oh, okay. Like, just making those lines jagged on, like, edges of buildings and the edges of roads and shit like that, it literally makes the game look like Virtua Racing for the 32X. Like, at that point, it's just... yeah, I know that this is going to be the easiest thing to say in the world for someone who doesn't develop games for a living, but one thing that just absolutely like boggles me to no end is like when you see these games ported to the Switch and the developer just, again, we can give Fun Selector a bit of leeway here because it is one dude, but this happens a lot with other cross-platform ports as well. It's just like, we're gonna take the game and we're gonna dip the resolution down from 1080p to like 480p for the Switch, and it'll look great. It's like, you can't do that. Like, it's gotta run at some level of a native resolution for the system. Otherwise, it just looks horrendous. And a game like this, it doesn't have textures to distract from you, so really all you see are those like jagged lines all over the place. Like, I know it's hard. I know there's a lot that goes into it, but yeah, it didn't look good. And I just kind of miss the days of when you could optimize a game like that for all the platforms it would appear on, but that's just kind of not really in the card, especially not for an indie, so it is what it is.
Yeah, and the thing that reminds me the most of is Lego Island on the PC. If you look at screenshots of that game and compare it to those Art of Rally screenshots, it's like ridiculously similar. And like you're saying, it's the lack of anti-aliasing most of all that's the biggest fucking point to bring up, because if you look at the telephone wires, it's genuinely zigzags. Yeah. It's just, oh man. And then if these decisions were taken to get it to like say 60 FPS or something, then it's still not optimal, but you can kind of see why that'd be the case, especially given the fact that Art of Rally is an incredibly difficult game and you're going to be playing it with no analog triggers as well, and then putting it down to 30 FPS, it's just...
I don't want to think about playing that game at 30. I can't play that game at a decent frame rate. It's too hard for me. Yeah.
And imagine that without the analog triggers as well to kind of measure the throttle and stuff. It's just... God. Simply put, it's not the way to play this game. The portability element gets a lot of Switch ports by, but in my opinion, just given how difficult and hard to wrestle Art of Rally can be, especially in those faster speed classes, it's just going to be an exercise in pain. And I hate saying that, because when I seen it was coming to the Switch, I was pretty excited to add another game to the roster, because I think I've said before, but I always want to try and support any racing games that come to that platform, purely because if you think about kind of a year and a half back when we had pretty much nothing on there, I think we had said on the pods that it'd be cool to see like a renaissance of racing games coming to the Switch, and it is slowly actually getting to a decent collection of like PS3 era ports and some other kind of smaller scale arcade racing game titles, and all the Kyloton stuff as well, but that is also a bit of a technical mishmash of nonsense. Yeah, so it's one of those ones where I seen it was coming, and I know Art of Rally is far from cheap. It's good that it's on Game Pass on Xbox, which I would say if you don't have a PC, definitely get that instead of this. But yeah, it's not the way to experience Art of Rally, and that's my heavily condensed review of Art of Rally on Switch. Don't touch this. It feels bad saying it. Fun Selector done a fantastic job in my opinion with the PC, and I heard the Xbox versions are fine as well. I understand wanting to get the game on the platform that is like still somehow exploding and getting more popular this far into its life cycle, but you won't actually get what makes this game good in the first place, or rather what I enjoy about it. I think just because we're talking about it again, Adam, you've still not really been won over by it, have you?
I honestly haven't gone back to play it since it came out, and I played it at a friend's place, and his controller just had like this weird sort of, the analog stick or the direction was just kind of like perpetually stuck, like so the car was always crabbing, which is like obviously a hard that's bad for any racing game, but it's really bad for Art of Rally. And yeah, I just don't, to be honest, like lots of people talk about how beautiful the game is. there's a level of minimalism to me that like is just kind of boring, and that game kind of achieves it. I don't really like the top-down perspective, and I know that you can adjust it so it's more behind the car and as close to the car as possible. But I don't think it's really it's not fun for me. It's mostly difficult. I don't find it that pretty. I don't find it that enjoyable in general. But I know a lot of people love the game, and if you do and you can master it, I imagine it has to be very satisfying, so more power to you. But yeah, I've never been one for those games. So any racing game that's like mostly top down, it's a combination of just like it's very removed for me. It's not intuitive at all. And also the inability to really see forward. Just kind of, I just have no desire to play a game where I can't see in the direction I'm moving as well as possible. I mean, it's why I didn't really like Crash Bandicoot when I was a kid. Like, I want the camera to be facing the direction I'm going in, and that's always kind of what that's how I choose to live my life, and that's how the games I choose to play as well. So
yeah, that makes sense to me. I think those are all fair points, to be honest. I mean, it's one of these games where I personally think that it's one of those games that you don't really get anything out of being fast in it, in the sense that, like you're saying, there's so many blockers there in terms of in the actual design, in terms of trying to get fast. I've always just seen it more of like, this is the essence of what rallying is, distilled into a kind of, not a chill experience, but a zen-like experience once you kind of get the chance to get decent at it. But like you say, there's no real incentive to do that. So it's definitely a title that appeals to some people, but not to others. And I also think it's this type of title that you'll see a lot of these outlandish statements about how good it is after like an hour from people who don't really play racing games and stuff. I don't mean to sound harsh like that, but I think it's one of those ones where if you're into that level of minimalism and the kind of almost hipster-esque take on the motorsport, it's very easy to come out with, oh, this is an absolute brilliant game and stuff. But it definitely has its deficits, and I think in our Discord actually the thoughts on it are pretty split, if I recall. There's definitely, for everyone that says they really enjoy it, there's a good few people who have the kind of similar issues that you have, Adam, and it's cool that it exists in the sense that I didn't like was it Absolute Drift or something the game before this one from Fun Selector, for the same reasons you were saying about like it just didn't tick any boxes for me, and I kind of Art of Rally in that exact same ballpark till I downloaded it. I think I remember saying as much when we talked about it on the pod, but it did grab me and I was really happy with what it was. But there's no denying, even just from like a cost perspective, I think it's just way too fucking expensive for what it is as well. But at the same time, worse games have charged full price. So
yeah. I think it just, $20 based on how much people like this game. If you're paying that on Steam or Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, if it's on is it on PlayStation? It's probably on PlayStation, right? Maybe not yet.
Yeah,
but if you're playing it for a good version of the game, it's probably worth it, because a lot of people do enjoy it. But don't maybe pay that for the Switch one.
No, absolutely not. Do not buy it on Switch.
Right. So I like that we got a little bit of our rally discussion in here. It wasn't planned at all, but those were just. You always, like, no one ever really shares like any images from like the Switch version of a racing game, but I remember you did it with WRC years ago, and you did it now with Art of Rally, and I feel like if not for you, no one would ever know how these games look, because no one ever plays them on the Switch. So
yeah, I'm always just like you were saying, like the means to get it to the Switch. There is a kind of a right way to take it, which is incredibly time consuming and expensive, and usually only done by Nintendo themselves. And then you've got the Kyloton way of doing things, which is basically smearing a lot of shit on the screen, dialing back the fidelity, and then just shipping it.
Yeah, and it's what's always disappointing to me is that, like, and I said this on Twitter, every time I go back to a game like Mario Kart 8, I am floored by how perfect that game runs, how amazing it looks. It is a tour de force, and honestly, it's one of those games that proves that we're at a time now where, like, if your art style is suited well for the system, and obviously you have Nintendo's wizardry and they know their platform inside and out as well as anyone, and they have the money and the resources obviously to do everything at the most optimal level possible, you can get visuals on the Switch and performance on the Switch that does not make you miss a more powerful console at all. Like that's how MK8 Deluxe is to me. And then you compare that to all of these cross-platform games that wind up on the Switch, and it's just like, I honestly, like, don't get me wrong, it absolutely is a money thing, but like you look at other games like Fast RMX that I would also put up there as like so beautifully optimized, like what Shinen did with that game. And I really think it is that, like, if you're making a game just for the Switch, you can get this amazing performance out of it. But anyone that's like trying to juggle multiple platforms at once will never take that time, and it's just really disappointing because it does leave the Switch looking and feeling like the inferior faux tablet handheld thing that it is, as opposed to what it can be, which is really, really good when people make games specifically for it. But,
yeah, exactly. And I think as well, with how powerful mobile devices are these days, it's just one of these ones where you would not wager against an Art of Rally port on iOS or Android absolutely spanking this version of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, and obviously that is to be expected if you're looking at the raw specs, but it's just that idea that a dedicated gaming device can be a failure on that level because there just isn't that level of care and attention to adapt the platform. Because I mean, obviously you brought up Mario Kart, and it's crazy because first of all that's a port of a Wii U game pretty much, and that game, that kind of originating game now is like 7 years old, but I would still wager that it's probably one of the most perfect examples of balancing an art style with technical prowess, and it, like you're saying, it's a tour de force of what can be achieved, and it basically leaves it all up to Nintendo to give us that type of experience, which for some people might be great, but with the amount of stuff that Nintendo put out that I just don't resonate with or care about, it's really frustrating that it's like you would just like to see some third party just decide randomly, you know what, let's make like an absolutely ridiculously banging Switch game, and like what you could potentially get from that. But when it's left up to Nintendo, it's like they won't bring out another Mario Kart for God knows how long now, because the 8 Deluxe
still like one of the best selling games ever.
Yeah, exactly, that's it. They're even saying that it does the potential to catch up with the Wii version at some point, or get within close proximity to it, which is fucking ridiculous. And because of that, it means that on the racing game front anyway, we're not going to really see anything that runs better and plays better than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Switch. I think that's just the reality at this point as it kind of enters that 5th year upcoming.
Yeah, I mean, I played MK8 like 2 weeks ago with friends, with a bunch of friends, and like I know in the past I've been like, I think Mario Kart 8 it's a great game, but I think it's a little overrated. Like, I just don't find it that much fun. But no, it's amazing when you can go back to it. It's been like probably 3 years since it came out, and then it's been way longer, obviously, if you're talking about that the Wii U version like you were. And it's just like, this game still looks incredible, and is one of those games that really makes you question, like, I'm playing this on the Switch, and it did that 3 years ago, and it still does that to me today. And I imagine like on the OLED one, on that OLED screen, it's gonna look really, really good. Man. But you will never. You buy the Switch on the promise of, and I guess every Nintendo console is kind of like this in a sense. The promise of the Zeldas and the Marios and the Mario Karts and all those kinds of games, and now Splatoon and Smash and whatever. But like, with the reality is, you have all of that, and then that only represents about 15 to 20% of what's there, and then the rest are just like these middling, just half-assed. They just don't take advantage of the system at all. They're not optimized for it, and they just look awful. That's the reality.
Exactly, and I think when we were talking in the Discord at one point about when the Ridge Racer IP trademarks got renewed and stuff, we were talking a bit about how you could basically do like a Ridge Racer collection, and you could probably like keep the visuals pretty much identical, but just up-res it to the highest possible element on the Switch and give it like an incredible frame rate, and it would look fantastic on that console, because those games have such kind of simple, blocky art styles in the sense that there's not too many inherently complex parts in there. Something that Ridge Racer obviously seems a bit more detailed, but for those like first kind of Ridge Racer games, it'd be incredible on the Switch, because it probably has that same type of art style we're talking about that can really flourish. But yeah, I think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is kind of your whack as far as incredibly performant racing games goes on the Switch, and it's a brilliant game, but it's also 7 years old effectively, so it's one of those ones where, like you're saying, is you buy a Switch for the Marios, the Zeldas, that's typically what everyone does, but it would be cool to see another racing game on there that performs pretty well. And in fairness to EA, I think the Need for Speed port that came out not that long ago was actually pretty decent on the console. So, but
which one is that?
It's why am I forgetting the name?
There was a Need for Speed on the Switch. I totally missed that.
It's not Hot Pursuit.
Oh, right. Hot Pursuit Remastered, yeah.
Yeah,
so
Hot Pursuit Remastered.
I'm such an idiot. No, I have that game. I just don't think of it as a Need for Speed, I think, at this point, because like it's old. I mean, it is a Need for Speed game, obviously, but like I was thinking, like, they didn't port Heat, they didn't port Payback. What are you talking about? No, that game runs well. I mean, the problem is that I don't like it, but it does run very well. I'm excited for the actually know what the best racing game on the system is going to be is Super Monkey Ball.
Yes.
Banana Mania, when that comes out. I'm very excited for that. Very excited to do the racing mode in that.
We need to use that as an excuse to do a pod on that game, because
we're absolutely going to do a podcast on Super Monkey Ball.
Sega is absolutely hitting out the park with this one. It's just like all you literally had to do was take those like levels from the first games that were in Deluxe, and I'd be like, that's more than enough, perfect. And then they were like, oh, but all the mini games are coming back too. Oh,
the only thing is, the only problem is the mini games. There's no online multiplayer. That's the big issue with the games.
Yeah.
You can't play the mini games online, which is like that really kills me, because I was gonna tell literally everyone I know to get this game so we could all play it, but you can't play that online. So
that is a shame. But like in terms of what that game is at the moment, it's so much more than I thought it was going to be. So like it's a sad, like, it's sad not to include it, because let's be honest, how often will you probably play the mini games with people offline? Probably not as often as you would have when we were younger. But yeah, the racing mode's definitely an excuse to do a pod on that, because I'm just so fucking psyched for that. And I think it's out the same day as the OLED Switch as well. That's probably the platform I'll get it for. But at the same time, I'm also tempted to get it for like the Xbox, so I don't know, I'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I know you're probably a fan of Monkey Football, which is a great mini game, but I would say definitely check out Monkey Baseball. Fortunately, it shares almost absolutely nothing with the game of baseball, so you just play it for a little bit, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just got to play through every single one of those. What a tangent this pod took.
This is great. This is good. I think if you were the kind of person who wasn't particularly interested in MRC, you at least, if you didn't stick around till the end, you skipped until about 50 minutes into the podcast where we started talking about Arv Rally, and you had something on the Switch and you had something to talk about. But hey, it all pertained to Nintendo racing games, and I think that's what we have to acknowledge here, is that even though we didn't try to do this, there was a thread running through this podcast from beginning to end, so it ties up nicely in a sense. You got the old and the new.
Yeah, exactly, and it was totally intentional, obviously. We planned all this out as well.
Right. Well, this has been a nice little surprise of a podcast and a mixture of discussion. So everybody, thanks for listening once again, and we'll hopefully you'll hear from us again soon.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. See you soon.